Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Shorikai Genesis Engine. So Shorikai is our one and only vehicle commander. So we've got a 4 mana Azorius 8/8 with crew 8. And it says Shorikai can be your commander. So we are a legendary artifact vehicle, and we've got 1 tap, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Create a 1/1 colorless pilot token with this creature crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So essentially 3. So it is a looter from the command zone, but notably it is not a creature, it is a vehicle. So we can play a lot of cards that we would not normally be able to play since our commander is not a creature. So first off, we've got just a bunch of card draw spells, including notably Cephalid Colosseum and Narset Parter Veils. Also, Skull Clamp goes very well with these random 1/1 pilots that we're creating. Then as far as combos go, we have, of course, Dramatic Scepter. Why not? Hullbreaker Horror, which can loop the 0 mana artifacts in our deck, like Mox Opal or whatever, or Sol Ring and Mana Crypt to generate infinite mana. And then with our infinite mana, because Shorikai is not a creature, we can tap this immediately. So if we have a way to flicker or bounce and recast Shorikai, we can always just keep looting through our entire deck regardless. Since this is not a creature, we can just tap it immediately. And then notably, this version is also the Poly Tyrant version, so we don't play any creatures in our deck other than Hullbreaker Horror. So any of these pilots that we generate can then be polymorphed or Proteus staffed into the Hullbreaker Horror. So polymorph and Proteus staff get rid of a creature that's in play and then get cards off the top of the deck until we find a creature and put it onto the battlefield. In this case, it's always going to be Hullbreaker Horror, and then Hullbreaker Horror can help us combo from there. Then we've got a bunch of counter spells, really heavy in on these counter spells, including Muddle the Mixture to transmute for other things, a little bit of fast mana for Shorikai, Azorius Mana Base, Silence to protect our combo turns or just make sure that Shorikai doesn't get countered, a bunch of mana rocks to ramp with, including Keys, which are of course good to untap, Grim Monolith, Mana Vault, these mana rocks that produce more mana than it costs to untap them with the keys. Also untaps the One Ring, Shorikai, any other artifacts that have other tap abilities. We've got Savin's Reclamation as a way to get stuff back. A bunch of removal, somewhat taking the form of bounce spells. So Alchemist Retrieval, Chain of Vapor, and Geist Wave, along with Otawara, are all bounce spells. And then we just have straight up Path to Exile, Resculpt, and Swords to Plowshares. Again, our commander is Shorikai, and a lot of our stuff also revolves around artifacts. So we do need ways of making sure that we can get rid of Null Rod, Collector Oof, Stony Silence. Then we got some stacks effects. So Cursed Totem shuts down activated abilities of creatures. And again, Shorikai is not a creature, it is a vehicle. And then the big one is going to be Humility. All creatures lose their abilities and are 1/1s. So normally, you cannot play Humility because most decks at least rely on their commander to some degree. Humility is included in this deck because, once again, we do not need any creatures except Hullbreaker Horror. And sometimes we don't even need that. So we can play Humility as a way to shut down all opposing creatures, which shuts off a fair amount of both aggressiveness and combos from opposing decks. So no Thoracles, no Dockside Extortionists, no Mana Dorks, nothing works from our opponents. Then we've got Narset, which shuts off extra draws, Pithing Needle to shut down one specific thing if we need it to, Rest in Peace for graveyards. We've got Tabernacle, because of course we only have 1 creature in our entire deck anyway, why not? And Torpor Orb to shut down ETB triggers. And then we've got some sweepers in Cyclonic Rift and Vanquish the Horde. And then a bunch of tutors. So some of the typical ones you would expect to find in Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor, but then a whole bunch of other tutors like Transmute Artifact, Tezzeret, War of Invention, and Urza Saga to go find artifacts, Merchant Scroll and solve the equation for spells, and then long-term plan, search your library for a card, shuffle, and then put that card third from the top, which we can get to fairly quickly using Shorikai's Looter ability. So again, the main things with this deck are going to be try to get Shorikai online quickly if possible, use some stacks cards to slow down the opponents, and then eventually either just outcard advantage the opponent or find ways of combining other things such as Narset plus Wheels to screw over our opponent's hands, or any of these combos to generate infinite mana. So like Isochron plus Dramatic Scepter and then just draw our whole deck with Shorikai, or polymorph the pilot tokens into Hullbreaker Horror and go off that way. It's also worth noting that because we untap with Shorikai, we can make infinite pilots using Isochron Scepter. Now, I guess that's technically not true to some degree because we are drawing cards, although we can put them back in the deck with Time Twister. So we can make infinite, or at least a good enough amount of pilot tokens, and then just overrun our opponent and use Hullbreaker to bounce anything problematic. We could, of course, also have additional or other things in the deck. We could be running Tidespout Tyrant if we wanted to. We could be playing other combos, like we could play Oracle in this deck if we wanted to, but mostly it's a pretty tight package where the stacks cards in the deck affect our opponents, but not us because of the unique vehicle nature of our commander. And that is Shorikai Genesis Engine.